So here's the thing. How to Train Your Dragon is a very, very good movie.
Most people would leave. Not us. We're Vikings. We have stubbornness issues.
With a really, really good soundtrack. I honestly feel like this is one of the most overlooked films of the last decade, which really isn't that risky of a statement when you look at the decade-long franchise that this film created. With 2 sequels and all that merchandising and branding and TV shows and specials and all that kinds of stuff. Like, did you know that there are How to Train Your Dragon TV shows on Netflix? I didn't. But yeah, one of them, this Race to the Edge, it has 6 seasons. I had no idea. I'm completely out of touch with the youth of the world. So, dab, floss, Fortnite. But I mean it when I say it, I think this whole franchise was carried on the shoulders of the success from this first film, which is a tale as old as time, right? The first film of some massive franchise is always amazing, and then the sequels and spin-offs and toy lines are all just a bunch of fratty business majors trying to milk the intellectual property for all it's worth. Because as much as I like the first film, the other 2 have a couple of awkward moments. I'm not saying they're bad films, they really don't feel as strong as the original.
The Alpha protects them all.
Like, that's a really weird message to have in your family film. And then, like, in the final film in the trilogy, which they didn't slap a number 3 on because I guess they were trying to reinvent themselves or something. It was an okay movie, I guess. I just couldn't help but feel like they were trying really hard to come up with designs for action figures instead of building on the story.
From How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World, the Dragons of Berk battle Grimmel and his Death Grippers. Hookfang, Stormfly, and their armored riders launch the attack.
Like, come on, they just look like Power Rangers. Because then, like, the end of the film undermines its own ending. It was a really weird epilogue. He's gone forever. Psych! It really just felt like the filmmakers going, look, he's old now, they have a family, that's it, it's done, it's over, just bury the damn thing and let's move on. But I'm getting off track. Beside all that, besides the dehydrated husk that is the corpse of How to Train Your Dragon that has been cruising on life support for the last few years, we shouldn't overlook how amazing the original film was. But no, for real, this is an incredible film, even when you think about how it's technically 10 years old. The character design is great, the sound design's amazing, but the story is fantastic. You can track Hiccup through the hero's journey, like where Toothless is a part of the world of the unknown that Hiccup has to learn about, and showing the other teenagers how to ride the dragons is the return with the elixir, and like literally the magic flight. But for me, the thing that makes this film so amazing, naturally, is the music. Shocking, I know, the music guy loves the music. But for real, this soundtrack is fantastic. This was John Powell's first solo animated feature film, and he brought the heat. Get it? Heat? Because dragons? Never mind. Anyway, side note, John Powell actually has a YouTube channel where he releases piano rolls and orchestrations of a lot of his music, and as of right now, it only has 2K subs on YouTube. So let's go send him some love and go subscribe. But it isn't just the music that makes this film's soundtrack so great, which is kind of a weird statement to make, I know. Like, just how the music sounds on its own isn't the whole deal. There's something else that this film does better than any other film that has ever existed ever. Now, I'm sure you all have your own opinions, and I'm gonna let you finish, but How to Train Your Dragon had the best opening of all time. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, what about Star Wars? And sure, I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty great. I play some when I'm grinding in Classic WoW. Who doesn't like, but doesn't have anything on How to Train Your Dragon? Okay, so obviously it doesn't have the same impact. But let me pose a question. What is the opening to a film and or a soundtrack supposed to do? Establish a tone, right? Yes, that joke was old before I started this video, but really, an opening's supposed to establish the world in which the narrative takes place, introduce us to our characters, and get the ball rolling. But to be clear here, I'm not like a story or a narrative guy, I'm a music guy. But there's a really great video on a YouTube channel called Grant Hodges that outlines a lot of the story beats and goes into more depth about how the opening to How to Train Your Dragon is really strong in terms of its world building and how it functions in the narrative. So if you're interested in the story, by all means, go and check his video out, links in the description. But there are 1,500 things that a good opening is supposed to do, and in many ways, music is very similar. So listen to what this film opens with. This is the piece of music that comes to represent Berk, the Vikings, and the Viking way of life.
Most people would leave. Not us. We're Vikings.
Shortly after that, we get this piece of music.
Misery. My village. In a word, sturdy. and it's been here for 7 generations.
Actually, let's put a pin in that. Just remember this tune, because we're going to come back to it later. But shortly after that, while we're getting narration from Hiccup... Oh, no, wait, I'm talking about a film on YouTube. Hold on.
Narration.
But while Hiccup's narrating, right when we get to the dragons, we get a more exciting statement of the Viking theme.
Most people would leave. Not us. We're Vikings.
Then, while we get introduced to Stoic, we get some of Stoic's theme that comes back whenever he's doing something... Stoic? Just cut that. Oh god, that's so bad.
That's Stoic the Vast, chief of the tribe. They say that when he was a baby, he popped a dragon's head clean off of its shoulders.
Then we get this great slow-mo moment. Cool guys don't look at explosions. And this is, in fact, Astrid's theme.
Astrid.
Obviously, this represents Astrid, and you can hear it come back in its full glory during the track titled Romantic Flight. Now right here, when Hiccup demonstrates his bola launcher, you can barely hear it. It's like a blink or you'll miss it kind of moment. Or I guess you can't really blink with your ears. God, that'd be weird. Anyway, you have to pay attention, but there's another little thematic idea here.
Like this, we'll throw it for me.
This cheesy, kind of jokey theme comes back at the very end of the film when the teenagers fly in to save the day.
Yeah! Rough, tough, watch your backs! Move, fishlings! Look at us, we're on a track!
It's kind of not too serious, poking fun at that generic hero theme. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I think it really fits that dorky style of the teenagers. Then right here, when Hiccup's listing off the dragons, we're introduced to a theme for the dragons, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, comes to represent the dragons.
A natterhead is sure to get me at least noticed. Gronkles are tough. Taking down one of those would definitely get...
And that is, in effect, the entire opening, at least musically speaking. Sure, the scene continues on for a little bit, but musically this is all we really need. And with that, you can see the strength in the opening of this film, not just from a musical point of view, but narratively as well. The opening goes through each of the main thematic ideas of the film, from the protagonist to the population, to what drove the protagonist to act in the first place, to what is arguably the antagonist of the film, and efficiently introduces the audience to the narrative environment. We're introduced to each of the characters and the main ideas in the story one by one, fantastically establishing not only the starting point, but also who and what are the significant players in this film. But because this film establishes the story so well, Powell was able to hijack that opening and establish all the thematic musical material that he'd end up using throughout the film. Okay, so let's go back to... yes, it's attention grabbing, it's big, it's loud, everyone knows it, it's wonderful, but really, this theme just becomes Luke's theme in Star Wars.
Tell your uncle if he gets a translator, be sure.
And although the title crawl is informative, it doesn't show us any of the characters or the settings or the motivations, and it didn't give Williams any opportunity to develop any kind of leitmotifs or musical ideas that Williams could use for the rest of the film aside from Luke. And really, that's just because Luke is the main character in Star Wars. You can take a look at Superman and say the same thing. It's a very similar opening to Star Wars. And if you pay attention, you can actually hear the love theme as a part of the opening, which is really the only music that Lois Lane gets in the entire film, which, if you really want to cut this open, you can argue that musically she exists as an accessory to Superman, but that's a discussion for another day. Or you can look at a film opening that comes from the opposite perspective. What if you have a piece of music that goes through all the musical material that you're going to hear, like the overture to a musical or the opening to one of those older Disney animated feature films, but since it's being played over the credits or in a live action setting over an empty stage, we don't get to associate those musical ideas with what they're going to represent on stage. Wait, John Williams adapted the music for the film adaptation of Fiddler on the Roof? Huh, you learn something new every day. Anyway, that's what makes the opening to this film the best intro to a film ever. It cleanly, efficiently, and concisely tells the audience everything they need to know and establishes the musical chess pieces that Powell will end up moving throughout the film. The opening scene, not even, in barely just the first 5 minutes of the film, Powell introduces the audience to all the musical material that he's going to use to tell the story. All except for one. This is Toothless's theme. You can hear it whenever Toothless is around. But here's the thing, and this is important. Toothless's theme is the only theme that doesn't appear in the opening of the film, because Toothless is an outsider. He isn't a part of Berk, or the known world, if you want to get all hero's journey-y about it. Toothless is an unknown to the Berkians, and Hiccup leaving the village to learn about Toothless represents the hero's journey into the unknown. You can actually check out my video on the Spider-Verse if you want to know more about that kind of thing. So when you first hear Toothless's leitmotif, it's really the only new material that you hear outside of that introduction. So when you first hear that theme, musically speaking, you're experiencing Hiccup's discovery with him. This is something that's different that we aren't familiar with. On top of that, there are two elements of this theme that Powell uses to tell a story. First, it's in bagpipes, and we don't really hear bagpipes at any other point in the story, in turn aiding Toothless in feeling like this alienated outsider. In fact, we don't get bagpipes appear in the score again until we see the Vikings tying Toothless up. But as the story progresses, we hear his theme in more familiar instruments, or at least instruments that made an appearance in the beginning of the film. Similarly, when we first hear Toothless's leitmotif, it's in a minor key signature. But as we see Hiccup and Toothless get to know and learn from each other, we start hearing his leitmotif in a major key signature. So you hear Toothless's theme all over the place when Toothless is around. Sure, great, exactly what you'd expect. But remember that piece of music I told you to remember from the beginning?
Misery. My village. In a word, sturdy. And it's been here for 7 generations.
That's technically Hiccup's theme. Now, full disclosure, there's a lot of material out there on the thematic and musical ideas of How to Train Your Dragon, and they don't necessarily all agree with each other on how certain themes are labeled or how they appear in the film, so I'll include links to all these sources as well as a bunch of additional reading in the description below. And I'd like to draw extra close attention to this video by a YouTube channel called Phoebe Kate that barely has 250 views, so go check her video out. As always, links in the description. But I'd especially like to draw attention to this video because it does an extra better job at explaining what I'm going to try to explain right here. Because if we call this Hiccup's theme,
My village. In a word,
and then we take Toothless's theme, then listen to what happens in the scene where Hiccup and Toothless figure out how to fly together with a track that Powell titled Test Drive. Not only do we hear these two come together, but at this absolutely epic moment where Hiccup ditches his cheat sheet and the two are able to just fly together symbiotically, it's emphasized in the music when Powell modulates or changes key signatures from D to E. It's that standard power ballad modulation. You hear it all over the place when you want to give your piece that extra momentum. But in this moment, we see and hear these characters come together in the film and the soundtrack, which gives us just this epic moment. But it doesn't just stop there. All these musical ideas continue into the sequels. In fact, I'd say it was the strong establishment of these themes in the first film that made them so effective moving forward. For example, in the second film, we see a lot more of Astrid and the teenagers. So naturally, we hear a lot more of Astrid's theme.
Stormfly, fetch!
Okay, I'll take you to Drago!
And we hear a lot more of the teenagers' theme as well.
Surprise! Yeah! What?
And when we see the Alpha in this hidden world of dragons, we get those unfamiliar bagpipes again.
hey, I thought...
And of course, we get a new theme for the new villain, Drago. But when it comes to Hiccup and Toothless, we get the music we're all familiar with. And by the time we get to the third film, because so much has changed, Powell has to introduce a lot of new material. Like, spoilers, but Stoic's dead, and he only appears in flashbacks, so trying to maintain the use of his theme could get kind of awkward. But there's something thematically interesting that happens in this film. So when they're deciding to leave Berk, they have this Thor Ragnarok moment where Hiccup says that Berk isn't a place, it's a people.
But Berk is more than this place. We are Berk, the people, the dragons. I say Berk is wherever we go.
Asgard is not a place. Never was. This could be Asgard. Asgard is where our people stand.
Which is more or less what we've been getting musically speaking. The theme for Berk is really also the theme for the people of Berk, or the Vikings.
Most people would leave. Not us. We're Vikings.
And naturally, this theme appears in the third film as well. So Powell ends up introducing new music for the third film, like a new theme for the new villain Grimmel, and a new love theme for Toothless and the Light Fury. But here's the thing, even though he introduces new music in the second and third films, he still opens them by showing us as much of the original material that he can in the opening. In the second film, we have a rehashing of a bunch of familiar themes.
This is Berk. The best kept secret this side of, well, anywhere.
Gotcha! Ha-ha! Whoa! Astrid!
Well played!
And the same thing happens in the opening of the third film. It even introduces us to the Toothless and Light Fury theme.
Bud? But yeah, sure, don't bother to wait for us. This is colorful as you get. Any run-of-the-mill paradise boasts beaches and sunshine. Dragons. Lots and lots of dragons.
And here's the thing, these themes being constantly reintroduced became so ubiquitous with the entire franchise that those specials on Netflix use them as theme music. And all of this entire franchise, this decades worth of musical material, all comes from the first 5 minutes of the first film. A collage of musical ideas that were all quickly introduced and then were allowed to naturally develop and breathe as the story unfolded. So yeah, I get it. When you first listen to it, maybe it doesn't have the same impact that you might get with something like, oh, I don't know. But from a structural perspective, the opening to this film acted as a foundation to build an intricately detailed score that has not only lasted through the onslaught of franchising and the never-ending sequels, but has also stood as a testament to the impact that well-crafted music can have as a storytelling device. And that's why How to Train Your Dragon has the best opening ever. Thanks for watching. I'd like to thank my patrons for making these videos possible. With a very special thank you to Alec Kulikowski, Andrew Luke, Clara Tan, DJ Nawananda, Dr. Woe, Emmett Hussman, Hayden Elza, Jordan Adams, Karen Rosenau, Myron John Tatarin, and Who Am I? I'd also like to thank everybody who requested that I talk about How to Train Your Dragon. I love this film series, so this was tons of fun to do. If you like what you saw here, be sure to subscribe and check out my other videos. Follow me on Twitter and Twitch to have your musical questions answered live, and if you really like what I'm doing, then consider supporting the channel on Patreon. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching.